Hello, welcome back to another video. This week I'm really excited to share my project with you because it's my birthday. Well, it's my birthday dress. Again, as always, buckle in for a long intro. So basically, ever since I started making my own clothes, I make myself a birthday dress every single year. Last year, I actually made it on here on the channel, so I'll link that in a card so you can go and check it out if you want to. I did post that like months after my birthday, but I did make it for my birthday. It's like a little treat that I give myself. If you're watching this on the day this video comes out, my birthday was on Monday. At the time I'm filming this, it's still Friday, so my birthday is not until Monday. So yeah, let me tell you more about it. I've just finished copying out all of the pattern pieces. I'm a little bit worried I don't have enough fabric. I'm using Gertie's Ultimate Dress Book, which if you've been here a minute, you'll know I love this book. I'm gonna be making this dress. It's very cute. It's basically like an overlay dress. There's like a tulle, organza, sheer layer, and then there's an underlayer that's opaque. So you can see here there's like an area where it's sheer and then an area where you get both fabrics. For the overlay, I want to use this fabric. This is a like organza, I think. It's a really sheer, like striped pink fabric. I love it. I think it's vintage, I'm not sure. I've had it for a very long time. For the underlayer, like lining fabric, I have this really pretty pink broadcloth. This is cotton broadcloth from Minerva. They sent this to me for free to use for whatever I want. I am hoping to use as little as possible of this because I have more. I have another pink sheer fabric, and again, I think it would look good with this fabric as an underlay. I'm ready to start cutting the fabric, but I wanted to show it to you before we get started. Straight off the bat, I realized my fabric was not wide enough for the box pleated skirt in the original pattern, and I didn't feel confident that I had enough fabric, or honestly patience, to cut the skirt pieces on a single layer. But seeing as this book is modular, you can mix and match the pattern pieces, so I decided to cut a 3/4 circle skirt instead. I did piece a little triangle at the hem, but I thought I might raise the hem anyway, so I wasn't too worried about that. And after I had the skirt figured out, I pinned the rest of the pattern pieces to my fabric and started cutting them out. It might be easier to cut out really thin or lightweight fabrics with a rotary cutter, but I personally found this specific organza pretty easy to work with considering, you know, it's organza. So I didn't really bother switching tools. I marked the fabric, pinned all the darts, and I started batch pinning everything as always. I also cut some interfacing for the cuffs and collar and fused it, but I wasn't really sure about how it looked, so I ended up taking it off and using some of the broadcloth as interlining instead. And then of course, rinse and repeat for the cotton broadcloth layer. There is a difference though. From the broadcloth, I'm cutting the same skirt, but also cutting out the pockets, obviously, and a different bodice plus lining for that bodice. I started sewing the cotton mostly because I was familiar with the construction since I've made it a million times, and because I knew the cotton would be easier to work with. So I stitched all the side seams of both bodices together with right sides together. This is a strapless sweetheart neckline princess seam bodice, by the way, very long name. And I'm sure you've noticed this video isn't super beginner friendly, but I would not recommend this project for beginners. So it felt very patronizing to be explaining every single little step to what I am assuming will be a more experienced intermediate sewists. If you have any questions though, leave me a comment, and if you're looking for beginner-friendly videos, I've got a whole playlist on my channel. But of course, I'm sewing this whole thing in batches as always, so I did start sewing the organza layer as well. I was really pleasantly surprised at how well the organza sewed. I was thinking I was going to have to switch needles and all of that, but it was really fine. Once I had my underlayer bodices done, I pressed the seams open and made some boning channels. They're basically bias binding, but I didn't cut them on the bias. And then I went ahead and stitched each folded edge of my not bias tape to each side of the seam allowance of each seam of the bodice. That's a total of 6 times for this case. I like to sew the channels to the outer layer. I also like to sew... My little boy is home. Hello! Okay. If you're new here, you probably won't know this, but whenever Zeus gets home from his walk, he likes to come over to me and say like, "Hi Mom, I'm back." So that's what just happened. Anyway, where was I? Okay. I also like to sew the bottom of the boning channels closed in the seam allowance so that the bones don't fall out while I'm working with the pieces.
Now I can add my boning. If you've been here a while, you'll have seen me use zip ties, and that's what I'm going to be using today. I cut them to size, usually the size of the boning channel, but I remove the seam allowances so I don't have to sew over them. And after cutting, you may find the plastic will be a bit sharp, so I tend to use a nail file to smooth them. This just prevents them from poking me and also ripping the fabric. Once I've got all the bones in place, I like to sew the top of the boning channels closed in the seam allowance, just like I did for the bottom to keep them in place. Next, I pin the lining of the bodice to the outer layer with right sides together, making sure I'm matching all of the seams. I really like to use clips for this kind of thing because I sometimes find in the process of trying to stick the pins in when I have a few layers of fabric, it all starts to shift and then my seams don't line up. I stitched that in place and then trimmed the seam allowance. I also obviously went off to have a nap because now I'm wearing PJs. I started working on the cuffs next. First, I basted one of the cuff layers to an interlining layer just so that they function as one piece, same as if I'd interfaced it. And then I pinned the other cuff layer to the interlined one with right sides together along the shorter long edge, which I can tell you now is not what you're supposed to do. It's supposed to be the longer long edge. But my insomnia has been terrible the last few weeks, which means I've had to take a lot of naps, but also work while sleep deprived, and that's like a really dangerous combination, let me tell you. Anyway, I did fix it afterwards, so don't worry. And the biggest issue I had with this organza was really that the edges were so hard to see because it's so sheer and so light. For the collar, I also basted a layer of organza to a layer of cotton and then placed another organza layer with right sides together and stitched it along the outside. Then of course it's time to press everything. I pressed all of the darts towards the side seams, realized I'd sewn the cuffs wrong, but only after I had already cut the seam allowances. And then I trimmed the seam allowance on the collar, flipped it right side out, and pressed it flat. Be careful with this. You really want to make sure you've got the facing and outer pieces in the right order because the seams will be visible on the facing side. Then I pinned the bodice of the organza layer together at the shoulders and sides. And I decided to baste the organza and cotton skirt pieces together, again, to use them as single pieces. This was the best construction I could come up with to accommodate my need for pockets, to have the least amount of visible seams, and to still keep the whole dress as one piece. The way it's done in the book doesn't include pockets, and from what I could understand, the organza bodice was like an over-the-top thing, which I didn't really like because you can clearly see the waistline seam in the dress. I basted the skirts together along the waistline and sides on my sewing machine with a longer stitch, but not big enough to gather the skirts though. Next, I got my cotton bodice and checked it against the skirt because I thought maybe I need to make the skirt smaller just because I realized I'm not the size that I thought I was for Gertie's patterns. Honestly, I'm still not sure I've figured that out. Did end up cutting off a couple of centimeters on each side of the front piece. I think my camera must have died here because the next footage I have is pressing the organza bodice, so I obviously stitched that, and I am finishing all of the raw edges by trimming and going over with a zigzag stitch. I also stitched the pockets to the skirt, and I'm going to press that now too. I feel like this whole video is just super chaotic, which is very on brand for this whole week and how this project felt for me. Next, I tackled the cuffs again. Essentially, I had to unpick the seam and sew the opposite one, but I also had to remember that when I stitched the cuff to the sleeve, I was going to have a smaller seam allowance. And I honestly didn't trust that I would remember that, so I went ahead and did the whole cuff and sleeve now before I forgot. Using my seam ripper was not a smart idea because it immediately ripped the single organza layer. So I did switch over to my thread snips, and that was slower but much safer for my fabric. I pinned the right seam and stitched it for both layers and then trimmed the seam allowance and pressed that in place. Then I pinned the short edges of the cuffs together, but I did this when the cuff was right side out, and I should have done it on the wrong side. It's fine and barely noticeable, but it's just one of those things that would make a more perfect finish overall. I trimmed the seam allowances, finished the raw edges, and pressed the cuff. Before I started pinning the cuffs to the sleeves, I did trim the seam allowance of the sleeve to match the cuff to make my life easier. Then I struggled for a good 15 minutes to figure out which way I had to pin the cuffs to the sleeves. In my defense, it's an unusual way, okay? It's the interlined layer of the cuff facing the wrong side of the sleeve hem. When I had finally figured that out, I stitched the cuffs to the sleeves and went over the raw edges with a zigzag stitch. Next, I stitched the side seams of the skirt together, starting around the pockets and going down the side. As always, I am using my pocket pattern, which gets sewn into the waistband for better weight distribution. I am going up the side to close the pocket a bit, otherwise everything will just fall out.
We have hit a snag, or another snag, I guess. The other snags were fixable. I'm having a problem with the collar. In order for my collar to like roughly meet at the front, it basically barely makes it past my shoulder seams. I've been thinking about what I wanted to do. Somebody suggested on Instagram, by the way, if you want to help me make these decisions, you should follow me on Instagram because I usually ask stuff there. Somebody suggested I make like a two-piece collar. That's not going to work because we have a center back opening, so that's not an option really. I think I'm just going to draft a new collar that comes all the way to the back. And I've had this problem with this collar pattern before. I don't know if there's like an issue with this book or I did the wrong size. I don't know, but it's annoying that I have to do all of that again. But I think it'll be worth the effort because it'll have a much nicer finish.
So I used the bodice patterns to draft a new collar. Essentially, I traced the neckline and then copy out the shape of the original Peter Pan collar. I can make a video where I explain this in detail if you want to see that. Anyway, now I have a new collar and it fits perfectly, so I pin it to the bodice with the facing side facing the right side of the bodice. Then I realized that I need to make some bias from this organza, and let me tell you, that was not a fun time, but I did it, and that goes over the collar, sandwiching it in place to finish the raw edge of the neckline. So yeah, I stitched that in place, trimmed the seam allowance, pressed everything in place, and then I hand sewed the bias as well, which again was not fun, but I figured that the collar would hide it, so I tried not to be too stressed about it looking perfect. Next, I set the sleeves in and I made a cute little box pleat at the shoulder with the extra ease. I finished those seams and pressed them in place. I also pressed the seam allowance of the center back of the organza bodice, as well as the seam allowance of the waistline on the lining of the cotton bodice. Then I started to pin the bodices to the skirt. Basically, I pinned the organza bodice to the skirt with right sides together, and then I pinned the outside layer of the cotton bodice over the top, sandwiching the organza bodice. I found an issue, which was that my organza bodice didn't match the raw edges of the cotton one, but I thought I'd figure it out as I went. I'm not sure. I was absolutely working on a very tight schedule at this point, so I didn't feel like I had time to cut out a new bodice, but I also always feel like the tight schedules zap all of my creativity. Anyway, I persevered, stitched that in place, and trimmed the seam allowance, as well as pressed it up towards the bodice. I chopped the excess off at the center back and tacked the two bodices together at the sides. I basically just did a small tacking stitch joining the side of the cotton bodice to the seam allowance of the organza one. Next, I attached my invisible zipper and moved on to close the center back of the skirt. I clipped the seam allowances of the center back seam of the skirt right where the zipper ends. I zigzagged the bottom, and for the bit under the zipper, I folded the raw edge under and pinned that to sew by hand. I pinned the folded edge of the bodice lining over the zipper as well as the waistband to sew that by hand too. For the bit of the organza bodice above the cotton layer, I simply folded the seam allowance back over twice like a rolled hem and stitched that in place on the sewing machine. I figured it would be visible even if I did it by hand, so I might as well make it quick and neat on the machine. I marked how much I wanted to remove from the hem, which turned out to be quite a bit, and cut it off. Then I did a very basic rolled hem as well on the machine. It's not my best hem ever, but it's okay. I added a hook and eye at the very top of the organza bodice under the collar to keep it closed, and then I also added one at the top of the zipper to hopefully help me zip it up because I had a feeling this was going to be on the tighter side. And anyway, here's the reveal.
Okay, so that is the reveal. I hope you enjoyed it. I have a few notes and I have a few thoughts that I want to share with you now that we're at the end of the video. I was really excited about it, but I think that I should probably have made a mock-up, and you'll have heard me say that many times in the past in videos and stuff, because yeah, I often skip that step and then regret it. So I definitely should have made a mock-up. I think this one has a lot of flaws and it's like not perfect, but I also am really pumped to make other overlay dresses and kind of explore this technique more. It's such a fun way to explore different fabrics, different textures, different opacities. I was a little bit disheartened with this dress because obviously as I was making it, I realized that a lot of things didn't go to plan, or maybe I made some mistakes because I wasn't paying a lot of attention. I wasn't sleeping that well. Like all of these things started rushing and started like compromising. As I started compromising certain things, I started like falling out of love with the dress and thinking, oh, whatever, I just want to finish it and like put it on for the reveal and be done with it and then start on something new. That happens sometimes with things you're making, especially when you're creating content. And then I actually went and put it on now, and I really love it. Like, it definitely has flaws, but I actually really love it. I think it looks really cute on me, and I feel like a princess, and I really, really like it. I think it has such a vintage vibe. It's really uncomfortable. Like, it's not a comfortable dress. It's itchy all over. Wherever there are seams on the bodice, it's itchy and uncomfortable. I'm very happy that I chose a cotton to go under this. I think that's a very good choice because it makes it very, very comfortable. I do think that this cotton is a little bit sheer. I'm not sure if this is like the type of like weight of fabric or if it's the color, because I do have some more of this cotton broadcloth in a different colorway, and I don't have the idea that it's as sheer, but we will see because I will be working with it soon. It is a little bit tight around the chest area or the like under layer, because obviously I have tailored this sweetheart neckline bodice to fit me, and I made it smaller, so it's obviously tighter. And then we have this issue here, which is that the bodice of the organza is too big. So I made it smaller and it's still like too big, and I feel like it's not, now at this point is not an issue of size, because the sleeves are starting to get tight and the back is like exactly perfect. It's just the front, and I think it's a bust issue, and I also think it's a length of my torso issue, because I have quite a bit of fabric here, right? And if I pull it down, it looks okay, but we still have this bit here. And I feel like this is something that I could fix with some toiles. So again, should have made a toile, didn't, it's fine. I added a little pearl buttons. These are purely decorative to the cuffs. I think they look really cute. And overall, I think it's very, very cute. I like the pockets. I really do like it. I think it looks really good on me. It's just like a little bit uncomfortable. I probably should have thought of that before I made it, but yeah, it's just a little bit uncomfortable. I hope you enjoyed coming along this very chaotic journey. And next week, we're gonna have some nerdy content coming. If you enjoyed my Megara cosplay, you'll like this next video that I've got coming out. So you can look forward to that. Yeah, if you did enjoy this video, don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. That would mean a lot to me and it would really help me out. And you can also consider following me on Instagram or TikTok. I post on there all the time. There's always a lot of stuff happening in my stories, so you can go and check that out. That's it. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.